And good morning, everyone. I'm Felicia Cito-Lau, the other co-lead of the organizing group for this year's event and the PIAC member for Ward 3. I hope everyone found yesterday's sessions valuable and informative. And we're so glad to see you back here today for another day of learning and inspiration. I'd like to invite our PIAC co-chairs, Zena Sherrick and Dee Williams, to welcome you on behalf of PIAC.
Hi, I'm Zena Sherrick, and I am a co-chair of the Parent Involvement Advisory Committee. The purpose of PIAC is to support, engage, and enhance parent engagement at the board level in order to improve student achievement and well-being as per Ontario Regulation 330-310, Section 6. Welcome and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and engaging with us today. I also wish to acknowledge and thank the members of the PIAC Ready, Set, Engage event working group in partnership with the Parent and Community Engagement Office, whom we have worked very hard to bring this weekend that caters to both elementary and secondary parent, guardians, and caregivers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dee Williams, one of the PIAC co-chair. This year is a year unlike any we've experienced before, and we've pivoted to host this event online. While we're not able to celebrate parent engagement in person as we have in past years, please join us at 2:45 p.m. this afternoon for a closing note of appreciation, along with ward networking breakout rooms. Trustees, superintendents, and PIAC members will be there to meet and greet you in your ward networking session. Also join us and get a chance to win a door prize for your school council to bring in a guest speaker on parent engagement, as well as a number of e-gift cards. To start, I am honored to welcome Elder Joanne Dallaire to open up the day and share teachings and ways in which we can practice the dish with one spoon treaty.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. And first of all, let me humbly apologize for being extremely human yesterday and sleeping in past 2 alarms at shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. My whole entire family was woken up to me screaming, looking at the time, look at the time, look at the time. And it just goes to show just how totally exhausting this is, trying to live in this dual world that we're living in. And it really is humbling to be so human. And the reason that I'm starting off with that is I want us all to know that it's paramount that we take care of ourselves. And yes, we do things for other people, but you must take care of yourself first. Today's a gorgeous day and in the beginning of our winter time coming. I'm hoping that for everyone, it's going to be a little bit easier for us to get through these COVID restrictions in the wintertime when we're naturally a little bit more in the house. Traditionally, that would have been the time that we told stories and shared, experiences with hunting and gathering and just laugh. So maybe an injection of something new into your family routine, like a board game or a puzzle. Try to find something new to put in this year to just make it obvious that there's something new going on in the house and a new way of communicating. So the idea that the TDSB is putting these workshops on, I can't tell you how wonderful that is. And for the participants who are taking part of it, good for you that you use all the resources that you can. I want to say a couple of words about, being a parent. Our children don't come with encyclopedias, and we can't just flip a page and say, oh, this is what's going on. I'll try this strategy. A lot of it is just we're doing the very best we can. And yes, we're going to make mistakes. I made mistakes with my daughter and I made mistakes with my grandson. But what we have is an opportunity to teach our children how to recover from mistakes that we made, but most of all, how to handle those difficult situations, the difficult situations of restrictions and frustrations, and all of those things that everyone is experiencing. So I hope that you garner a lot of tools and insights and awarenesses, but most of all, I ask that you be patient, compassionate, and loving with yourself, whoever you are, whatever position you hold, as you go through life extremely stressed in these COVID times, and that you take care of yourself and see yourself as a priority. I'd like to offer that's part of the Dish with One Spoon treaty, is that we all come together in friendship and in peace. But most of all, most of us have a very destructive, negative dialogue towards ourselves. So pay attention to that. Don't feed those things that you don't need to feed. Remember that in the winter, you're going to be planting a lot of seeds. Just take good care of yourself. And I'd like to offer a morning prayer that I hope will remind all of us of our symbiotic relationship with all things around us, and also encourage us to celebrate our differences and to know that no matter where we come from, we all come from that human race, but we can learn from each other to do things differently in a different culture's way. And that's what we've always done as human beings. So I'm going to offer my name in my ancestral language, my spirit name, which is Shadowhawk Woman. I'm from the Wolf Clan, and I'm Omashkigo. And then the rest of the prayer will be self-explanatory. Thank you. Wache, Ani, Sego, Nit, Kwe, Tense, hello. Adishna Hasan, Sahakutep, Kashishan Ishku, Mahigan Dodam, Omashkigo. First of all, let us give thanks for this opportunity to come together, to open our hearts and open our minds to a new way of seeing and new way of being. I ask that you watch over everyone here, their families and their loved ones. I ask that you help them put themselves first so they can be there for the rest of their family and friends. I also take at this time the opportunity to ask you to continue to watch over our brothers and sisters who are on our streets, in our jails, our institutions, hospitals, seniors' homes, shelters, and treatment centers. And let us give thanks for any plant and animal life that we will eat today, those who have given their lives for us. And for all those people who work so very hard behind the scenes to get our food ready for us, we thank them. Let us give thanks to Mother Earth and for all that she provides for us, and pray for her forgiveness for how we treat her, and pray for the healing of her waters. Let us give thanks to Father Sky, who watches over us and tends to the star people, reminding us of the many things we must take care of in our day. Let us give thanks to Grandfather Sun for giving us the energy of his life, and for reminding us that too much of something is not good for us. And to Grandmother Moon, who when she is full, lights our way in the darkness. And when she is a new moon, she reminds us that even in the darkness, the light is there. And she reminds us of the many phases that we will go through from day to day. We ask that each of us be reminded of our uniqueness, our specialness, and our place in our families and in our work and neighbors' positions. We all need each other. And please let us learn to not point out the differences, but to celebrate the differences. And I hope that everyone today receives something that makes them feel good about the work that they do and the families that they are. And I say, Chimigwech, 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 aho, all my relations. Hi, hi. Thank you to everyone, and I'm wishing you an absolutely wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Elder Dallaire. Thank you for being human, and thank you for your wise words today. Just a reminder that the conference hashtag is PIAC Ready, Set, Engage. So please ensure that you share your thoughts using the hashtag throughout the day. Before we introduce the chair of the board to bring greetings, we want to acknowledge that in our anxious excitement of hosting the first virtual PIAC Ready, Set, Engage event, we inadvertently indicated that Trustee Brown was to be speaking yesterday instead of today. So Trustee Alexander Brown, we are honored to have you join us today, bringing greetings as originally scheduled.
Good morning. Thank you, Elder Delaire, or Shadow Hawk Woman, now that I know, for the prayer and the great words of wisdom. And good morning, everyone else, and welcome to PIAC's annual parent conference, day 2. And I think this is the 14th year uninterrupted that we've had this. So congratulations. My name is Alexander Brown, and I'm the trustee for Ward 12, Willowdale, and the chair of the Toronto District School Board. And I'm so pleased to be here on screen with you all today. I want to extend a warm welcome and thank you to Interim Director Kathy Witherow, who's joining us today, to the Parent Involvement Advisory Committee, my trustee colleagues who may be here, and of course, all parents, caregivers, and school council members who've joined us today. And to those who weren't able to join us, this is being recorded, so perhaps you can watch it later, and you're welcome as well. This morning, I want to begin by talking about the importance of school councils at the TDSB. We all know how important school councils are. You're an essential part of all of the work that we do as trustees and as staff, teachers at the TDSB. As members of the school councils, you're a huge asset to your school community, to its administration, and ultimately to our students. You bring the voice of your community to the school. And by working with the community and providing a platform for parents and caregivers to be heard, everything you do ties back to student success. And there's so much that many of you do that we never even see or hear about on a daily basis. But these are the things that make an immense difference every day. So on behalf of the Board of Trustees, thank you for doing this, and especially for continuing to do this at a time when public education is being put through the ringer, so to speak, with the COVID-19 pandemic. When schools, families, and communities work together to support learning, children tend to do better in school, to stay in school longer, and to enjoy school more. We know this. School councils collaborate, and that collaboration has never been more important as we continue to adapt to this new way of learning, living, and working. And regardless of whether COVID-19 stays with us or goes, and I know we all hope it goes soon, we must work together to ensure the health and safety of our school communities and ensure that our students can continue to learn at a time when it is much different and public education, as I said, has changed. This is the time to transform public education and take advantages of the opportunities that are now everywhere. We need to continue to work with all of you at the local school level and as an integrated system to ensure we capitalize on those opportunities now. We can all focus on the negative things that have happened, but I'm looking for the positive things that we can grab on to help us change this for the better. We know that this has not been an easy time for you, for your children, for your families, or for any of us. And getting our school back up and running, our school system back up and running, it's not been perfect, never is perfect. But without your support, we wouldn't have been able to achieve even what we have in the last 8 or 9 months. So I cannot thank you enough for your patience and your understanding. And on top of your many responsibilities, you've been helping your child adapt to the new ways of learning and attending school. And most importantly, you've been helping them cope. And to echo what Elder Delaire said earlier, I want you to please take care of yourself as well. And to close, remember that your local trustee is always there if you have questions or concerns about your child or the school. And I'm certain that by working with your trustee, you can continue to have an impact on your child's education and the education of about 250,000 kids. So that's a big responsibility. Thank you for being a partner with us in all of this, because 250,000 kids are counting on us. We're here to work with you in your schools and for our children. I look forward to continuing that work and to the rest of today. Enjoy the day, learn a lot, and thank you. Chimigwech.
Thank you so much, Trustee Brown. The keywords, my takeaway is that collaboration is very key. And this event is a testament to the collaboration between parents and the TDSB staff. Thank you very much. I'd like now to welcome Dr. Kathy Withrow, Interim Director of Education, to bring greetings. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Felicia. And thank you to Chair Brown for his remarks, and miigwech to Elder Joanne Dallaire for starting off our Sunday conference in a good way. Good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Kathy Withrow. I am the Interim Director for the Toronto District School Board. I just want to start by saying the theme for the conference of Ready, Set, Engage could really not be more appropriate for the times that we're in. When I hear those words, I think of a launch, or I think of beginnings. And over the past 9 months, we have launched and we have begun more new things in education than I really can remember in my long career. I really do want to thank the Parent Involvement Advisory Committee. PIAC plays a vital role in the Toronto District School Board. I want to thank the committee for planning this event, for inviting me to participate, and for arranging such a wide array of sessions and speakers for our parents, guardians, and caregivers to participate in. We are much richer because of the involvement of PIAC. In today's work, as well as in our board. You know, as you know, we've said this many times, and Chair Brown also alluded to it. We have spent the last 9 months really engaging in challenging times for schools, challenging times for communities. COVID-19 has changed the way that we work, the way we live, and it's changed the way that we learn in the TDSB. While we've done our best as a school board to adapt and to effectively communicate the changes, this pandemic has presented us with new challenge. It truly has blurred the lines between what home and work looks like, what home and schooling looks like, and we acknowledge, sorry about that, and we acknowledge that our families, our staff, our students have faced the same struggles that we've all faced, and that these times have been incredibly uncertain and anxiety producing. We have also appreciated the feedback that we've received along the way. We know that we can do better. We know that we can do better based on the feedback that our families have provided us. We've undergone significant changes over the past several months, from introducing our virtual school of 83,000 students, to implementing various health and safety measures and changes to the way our bricks and mortar schools operate. I want to thank all of the parents and families out there for your patience, for your flexibility, for your partnership, and for your resilience as we learn to navigate through these really uncertain and challenging waters. We will once again be reaching out to parents because we know the value of hearing from our parents and guardians and caregivers. We did this in the spring through a thought exchange, and we will be engaging again in the coming weeks. We know how important it is for you to share your experiences with us so we can learn from you and with you. And so look for that in the next few weeks. As parents and guardians and caregivers, you play an essential role in keeping our children and our school communities healthy and safe. As Felicia said, a key part of this is the collaboration that we have between home and school. It truly has never been more important. And we want to stay informed, we want to keep you informed, and we want to continue to do our best to collaborate to keep our schools a safe place to be. And you continue to hear the Premier and the Minister of Education talk about schools as a safe place to be. And it is no short because of the work that we've done together. We want to thank our parents and guardians for the important role that you played in the education of your students. With the many challenges we've faced over this past year, you continue to be the foundation for your children. You continue to support public education, which we truly appreciate. You've helped your kids, whether it's from the new technology to thinking about how we do our homework, or simply being there to talk to your children. And we know how important mental health and well-being has been over the past several months. We are learning how to think about and center our students in a different way, in a virtual world, as well as in a world of bricks and mortar that looks very different than what it did before. So we do want to thank all of our parents for being partners in all of this. And in closing, I really do hope you find these conversations to be informative and engaging. I want to thank everyone who has helped to make this event possible. The leadership of PIAC is extraordinary, and I want to thank our PIAC co-chair, Dee Williams, our outgoing PIAC co-chair, Zena Zarek. Thank you, Zena, for your leadership over the past 2 years. I want to welcome our new PIAC co-chair of Felicia Cito-Lau, and for Trustee Doyle's continued leadership in PIAC, both in the past and moving forward. And also our staff member, Michelle Monroe. Michelle, we know all of this is part of the work that you do daily, but you do go above and beyond. And I want to acknowledge your work in this conference and the work you do every day to engage with our parents and caregivers. So thank you, Michelle. And with that, I'd like to wish everyone a great conference. I'm looking out my window and there's a blizzard. This is a great day to be on a Zoom call, learning with each other and from each other. So thanks everyone and have a great day.
Thank you, Director Withrow, for those encouraging words. Please welcome Trustee Trixie Doyle for Ward 14 and also Trustee Representative of PIAC to introduce our keynote speaker, Mante Molepo.
Thank you. This morning's inspirational keynote is from Mante Molepo. Mante Molepo is a lawyer, human rights advocate, and equity and diversity advisor. She works with organizations to address equity, diversity, and inclusion, focusing on unconscious bias and anti-Black racism. She's also a founding member of Parents for Diversity, an organization committed to creating equitable and inclusive learning environments for all students. In 2018, Mante was recognized as one of Canada's 100 accomplished Black women. Mante is on the board of directors of human rights organizations, including Amnesty International Canada. We are so pleased to have her with us here this morning as our first keynote. So please help me welcome Mante Molepo.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect, thank you. I'm just trying to put my slides up here so you can see me. I'm just not able to share my screen, it's been disabled.
Are you able to share now? Can you try?
Yeah, I think so. Does that work for you? Are you able to see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I want to thank you so much for being here, for inviting me here today to present. I'm here located in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. And my name is Mante Molepo. I use she, her pronouns. And as you had indicated, I'm the founding member and director of Parents for Diversity. And I've been, really working a lot on anti-racism for a number of years as a result of my own children's personal experiences with anti-racism within their educational system, which really got me into advocacy. I practiced law as an international trade lawyer for, international trade law and policy for about a decade. And really when my kids began to experience anti-Black racism at a young age within their schools, my trajectory changed. A girlfriend of mine, excuse me, from law school, her kids across the river in Quebec were going through similar challenges. And we really it became apparent to us that there are probably other families out there who are going through similar challenges. And so we started to talk to other families, and it was really then that we started to focus our work on addressing these barriers that our kids were facing. And we founded Parents for Diversity, which is now a federally incorporated not-for-profit organization. And a lot of the work that we focus on is on anti-racism because of our lived experiences as parents with racialized children. And we really try to work with not just schools and school boards to think more critically about fostering equitable and inclusive education, but also to work with families to support them, because a lot of families from racialized backgrounds really have a different understanding and perspective when it comes to education. And so working with them to navigate the school system in a way that they can protect and advance the interests of their children. So really today, I want to talk about what that looks like. I'm also on the board of directors for Amnesty International Canada and the Parkdale Food Center, where I work on these issues. So food security as it affects, our marginalized communities, especially now as it's being amplified during a global pandemic. Today, I will be using different terminology. I refer to racialized people when I speak about different races. This is to reinforce the idea that race is very much a social construct, that it is something that is fluid, it is something that has been imposed on people who are not white. And this is also really important in order to avoid using language like visible minority or by Black, Indigenous, people of color, or the acronym BIPOC, in large part because when we use that terminology, we tend to homogenize the experiences of racialized people into one group, when we know that racialized people experience and navigate the world and internalize racism in ways that are very different from one another. And so the other idea too is that, visible minority may be kind of anachronistic, especially when we look at communities and provinces like Ontario who are increasingly racialized, and even within our school communities, how much racial diversity there is. And so, thinking about how these populations are increasing, it's not really appropriate to be referring to racialized communities as minorities. So today I really want to, look at how our identities as parents really impact parent engagement, how we can engage parent engagement increase parent engagement during a pandemic, and looking at it from an anti-racist perspective, because many of the barriers that parents have, especially nowadays, is a result of structural barriers as a result of racism. And so I want to unpack that a little bit as we go through our session today. Often, though, when we engage in conversations around race and racism, we may experience discomfort. So I always like to set the intention when I talk about race and racism. And I'm really inspired by the work of Glennie Singleton. He does a lot of work on anti-racism and racial equity in education. And he came up with these 4 agreements of courageous conversations. And I would invite you to really reflect on them and have them guide our discussion today, even though we're not very much in an interactive session. So the first one is to stay engaged, remaining morally, emotionally, intellectually, and relationally engaged in our conversation and this discussion today. And this is really, especially where we're in a digital space, and sometimes when we experience discomfort, we may want to just check out of the conversation. It's a lot easier to do that when we're virtual. The other one is to speak your truth, being willing to take risks and be absolutely honest about our thoughts and our feelings and our opinions, and being mindful that, the truth that we're speaking is the truth that belongs to us and that we have experienced as individuals. Experiencing discomfort, this is really a normal part of having these courageous conversations. We will feel that discomfort, but being able to push through that discomfort will enable us to engage in real dialogue. And then just lastly, expect and accept non-closure. I'm here for 45 minutes today. We're not gonna have all the answers to achieving racial equity, especially when we're talking about parent engagement. But this is just an opportunity to remember that we're here to foster dialogue, which will be part of this long-term growth and journey that we're all on together. And I always really, when we talk about these issues, it's important that we kind of have an understanding of our social identity. And this is really going to inform how we engage with parents, because then we're more able to understand the different lived experiences that they're dealing with, and how they navigate the world, often in ways that may be different from us. So I just wanted to start with a short reflection activity. I know we're on in a virtual context and there's not a lot of interaction, but I do welcome you to use the chat box to participate. And I'm just going to read a few questions and invite you to reflect on each statement that I read and how it resonates with you. And if there's one or two that stick out for you, I welcome you to share your responses in the chat box. So the first one is, my identity has affected where I've chosen or been able to live. I feel safe in my neighborhood. My identity has affected how educators interact with me. My identity affects my ability to access proper healthcare. I'm able to see myself reflected in popular TV shows, books, and other media. My identity has affected how I raise my children. And lastly, I'm mindful about my appearance, for instance, the way I dress, the way I present my hair. So just thinking about that for a moment, if there are any of these that resonate with you, I welcome. I'll just check the chat box here. Oops, sorry. That resonate with you, I'll just check the chat box here. So there's one here that says your identity has affected the way you raise your children. And I shared that earlier with my kids. My kids identify as Black, they're mixed heritage, but since from a young age, when my daughter was as young as JK, she was told by a group of kids that she couldn't play with them because she was not white. In 1 year, she was told she couldn't touch another white student because that student didn't like to be hugged by Black people. And also the lack of representation within the curriculum, where we don't learn about Indigenous or African history and culture and identities has really had an impact on them. So a lot of you say that these all seem to impact you. My identity has definitely impacted how educators engage with me and my children. One of you says, I'm a teacher. However, I feel connected to all learners and often shifted into a parent voice for learners when needed to advocate for them. So my identity is that, and my capacity enhances though through student voice and parent engagement. And that's really critical, how we use our identity to interact and to inform our relationship with those in front of us, whether it's the parents that we're working with or the children that we're teaching or engaging with. So there are different ways, as you can see, how identity affects us. I'll just give another example. For me, my identity affects my ability to access proper healthcare. I have a daughter, my oldest daughter. We had gone to rent a cottage over the summer. We were in a predominantly white community, and one morning she was making us breakfast and she sliced her finger open, and we thought we would have to take her to the hospital. We had to get stitches. And my husband, who's white, I had to think for a moment, the healthcare she would have received if I had taken her as opposed to my husband, and that was the thought that I had to think about, because I do a lot of work on anti-racism and I know about the data on how racialized communities are treated within the medical system. So I asked him to take her. Fortunately, it wasn't a serious enough issue that her health was at risk, but still, as a Black parent, these are thoughts that have to go through my mind as I try to navigate, healthcare system or, act in the best interest of my children. So thank you very much for this. And again, I see one here from Stephanie. You say you're mindful about your appearance and the way you dress and how you wear your textured hair. Absolutely. And I'm sure you've dealt with the microaggressions of people touching your hair or touching the hair of your children. And we'll talk about what that means later on, but these are just different ways in which parents navigate the world, and also how that impacts in turn their feeling of comfort within our school communities. So I really wanted to focus on the different ways in which parents are engaged within this modern context. It's a very different time, even compared to 12 months ago, when we were not living through a global pandemic. We had, the death of George Floyd. It wasn't even present. And we've seen those two events in the past several months really impact the world. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit today. the idea of social location, we just did that short activity to kind of understand our different social identities. And it really is to thinking about, and there's a great definition by Community-Wise that defines social location as a person's place in society based on markers such as class, race, gender, sexuality and ability, religion. And this social location will really dictate our access to resources, access to power and privilege, and influences how we all interact with the world around us. And so this is really critical when we think about COVID. You know, so much has been amplified as a result of this global pandemic, and our social locations have often been had to adjust and been affected greatly by this global pandemic. Inclusion and representation is also another thing. You know, I look at growing up, I'm of African descent. My mother was a teacher, my dad was an academic, but in African culture and many other cultures around the world, there's a lot of deference that we have towards educators in the education system. And so we see parents who don't necessarily, quote unquote, fit the definition of engagement because they're not, you know, sitting on student councils or actively volunteering on or in school events. But that doesn't mean that they're not necessarily disengaged from their students' education. It just manifests and looks very differently. And so being aware of how that plays out within our school communities is very critical to ensuring active parent engagement. I talk about the deference that many parents have towards educators because it is a good thing in ways in which we kind of trust our education, our children's education to our teachers and administrators. But there's also that corresponding problem that especially Black communities face with a lot of deficit thinking that exists amongst some educators. And we see this play out, there's a lot of data that shows the disproportionate discipline or the low expectations that manifest in the form of streaming. So that really impacts the way Black students navigate the school system. And so really thinking more critically about how we engage parents in a way that's going to respond to these problems within our schools. And then COVID-19 and racism. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in our session today. So we see with COVID-19, there has been a real impact, not just on families, but on everyone really who's had to navigate this incredibly challenging period in our lives. We've seen so many things change, from the closing of schools to the physical distancing. And this has really had an impact on so many parts of our existence, including our mental health and well-being. And we see how, in particular, how racialized and Indigenous communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID. In Toronto, by mid-August, 83% of reported cases involved racialized communities. 22% of those were Black, even though the Black population is about 9% within Toronto. We see that in Brampton, there was a great article in the Globe and Mail about that, has consistently having some of the highest cases of COVID in the country. But when we look at it, you know, there are about 600,000 residents for one hospital, which is really not consistent with the access to healthcare that many other communities across Canada have. Large populations within Brampton, large amount of the residents work in factories and warehouses and food processing. So we see that the opportunities to telework do not exist as much. And so those privileges don't exist, and that really has an impact on these families. We also see a lot of financial privilege coming out of COVID, especially in the summer when families were scrambling about what to do with the return to school. Families were creating pods where they were hiring even, you know, professionally licensed teachers to educate their kids. This is something that really, if we think about the long-term implications of and how it's really enforcing class and racial divisions within our society. And also thinking about the food insecurities as families lost their jobs and had to turn to food banks. Many of them had to shut down in the early spring. And so school boards were resorting to other forms of feeding students during this time. But we saw a lot of these foods were not culturally responsive to the different identities of students within the board, and thinking more critically about how that we could respond to those needs as well. But they have also been incredibly beneficial aspects of COVID-19, especially when we look at it within the education context. You know, a lot of families decided to keep their kids home for many reasons, myself included. And I've seen a real benefit with the idea of my children feeling the comfort of being at home, their racial, their cultural identity being really reinforced at home, and families where English is not necessarily the first language, really being able to speak their language at home, eat the foods that they identify with at home without the shame of having to be judged about what they're bringing to school. These many ways in which we have been able to feel the comfort of being at home and also being able to learn. I've seen for my kids, it's been really critical for me to have a culturally responsive form of teaching for them. And so being able to work on projects for my daughter, instead of, you know, learning poetry by Robert Frost, we started to learn poetry by Maya Angelou. And when we started to learn about Indigenous history or settler history here in one of her classes, I really encouraged her to look at, you know, First Nations communities being impacted by European settlement and what that looked like. And I find in these ways, my kids would have never had these opportunities being in the classroom. And so I have seen some benefits of distance learning. And so we have to think about how then can we continue to engage families, you know, even though they're at home and learning, they still belong to a school community. And so how do we interact with them in a way that is going to keep them part of that school community? And I just wanted to talk about what are the most glaring aspects of that we have noticed over the past several months, navigating COVID-19, and also it also happened around the same time in May of this year, when George Floyd was murdered. And, you know, this is an American issue. His death took place in the US, but it had an international presence and impact. You know, countries around the world responded as people around the world watched a man lose his life over 8 minutes. And it had its impact, obviously, here in Canada. We saw a growing awareness around the Black Lives Matter movement, and schools, communities, governments taking steps to address systemic anti-Black racism. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I think that in order to address issues affecting parent engagement, really needs to identify the structural and institutional barriers that limit their engagement within their schools. And I think racism is definitely one of them. And I include this definition here by the government of Ontario. But it's also important to consider that racism is an organized system of oppression that is built on social categorization by dividing groups into classes of races. It devalues and disempowers racialized groups into an inferior status. And it's manifested in so many different ways. And we're going to talk a little bit about that because we tend to associate racism with really overt forms and blatant forms of racism when it's a lot more embedded and insidious in that. So the first one is that race is very much a social construct. It is something that we have to really understanding our sense of awareness about racism is that it's really driven and shaped by how we have categorized groups into racial categories. So this has really played out a lot within these past few months. I see how in January of this year, you know, we had a school board in Toronto which launched an online petition calling on the school board to regulate families who have traveled from China, to impose a 17-day self-quarantine, and to also monitor their movements. This took place right before the measures that the government federally and provincially took to enforce mask wearing and also to have self-quarantine for anyone who's traveled internationally. But we saw that play out and also really amplify the xenophobia against Chinese and other Asian communities, because anyone who looks Chinese is being blamed for COVID-19, which is really creating a lot of problems within our society. Hate crimes are increasing against Chinese populations across the world, and it's definitely taking place here in Canada. And we see it playing out in our classrooms, and the impact that this is having on families is quite severe. We also see the need for us to be a little bit more aware of our racial identity. One of the reasons why racism is so deeply entrenched within our society is that we are often taught and told and socialized not to talk or think or consider race. And when we don't do that, when we're what we call colorblind, or what I refer to as color evasive, when we don't recognize race, we're not able to address the issues that arise with racism. And so being more aware of that is critical to addressing racism. In her book, White Fragility, author Robin DiAngelo writes about how white children develop a sense of white superiority as early as preschool. And society sends constant messages that to be white is better than to be a person of color. Racism is not something that we inherently possess. We are socialized into this world and develop an awareness of race and racism at a young age, but we're also taught not to talk about it. So through this process of socialization, we do internalize messages about whiteness and also the inferiority of certain racial groups. And whiteness really refers to the social dimensions of racism that serve to elevate white people over racialized people. And white people also enjoy white privilege that enables them to navigate the world in ways that many of us are not able to. And this is often very invisible to them. And most white people are not, again, socialized to thinking about their race. So this, again, has impacts on the way in which we would engage with families within our school communities. Racism also manifests at different levels, at the institutional and at the individual level. At the individual level, we see it in the way we interact with one another, whether it's attitudes, feelings, beliefs, when we interact with one another, and it can be interpersonal. Racism is also systemic, you know, it is deeply entrenched in our institutions, whether it's healthcare, government, even education. And so we have to be aware of the hidden biases and institutional practices that exist within our society. And then different aspects of racism is, and this is where I think it's a really critical part, is understanding that racism is not always that really entrenched idea of white supremacy that we often see, not the tiki torches or white supremacists marching through the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017 with tiki torches. It manifests in so many ways, and we've really come to this idea of a good-bad binary where, excuse me, where to be racist is to be bad, and that good people cannot be racist. And we really need to think more critically about that and deconstruct that thinking in order to be able to work towards a more anti-racist society. Because racism is socialized and so deeply entrenched in our subconscious, it operates as a form of unconscious bias and is often communicated as a form of microaggressions. And these are some of the ways in which they're often very silent and we're not very much aware of them, but they still have a tremendous impact on racialized people in our society. And with that, I wanted to really kind of do this short activity with you to talk about what kind of racism we often think about. And again, like I said, we think about racism as, hate crimes, blackface, the KKK, Amy Cooper calling the police on Christian Cooper in the park, modern day lynching. But there's a lot more that exists below the surface. The forms of racism that we often don't see. And I wanted to invite you to scan your QR code, this QR code with your cell phone. It's a little Padlet activity. You can participate through this, or you can type your responses in the chat box. I welcome, what forms of racism for you exist below the surface, the kinds of racism that we don't often see in our society, but are very much alive and present. And in particular, the ones that you think that would affect how parents interact and participate with their schools and school communities. So this is a Padlet activity. So as you click on the Padlet, At the bottom right, you will see a pink circle with a plus sign, and you can just click on that and you can enter your responses. You can use images, GIFs, you can type, you can be creative, use whatever you want. And also, like I said, you can also provide your responses in the comment box here as well. If the QR code isn't working, I see that you say it's not working, then you may, I just included the link, the URL here in the top, so you can just click on that and enter your responses. So one of your responses is racial slurs. Another is my identity has affected how educators interact with me. So many stereotypes. And stereotypes is an issue. I'll include the URL again, right there.
Sorry, Monte, just wanted to ask, can you just change it so that it goes to all panelists and attendees?
Oh,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I realized I didn't do that. There you go. My apologies, everybody. Now you should have it. I'll just give you a moment to just to complete the Padlet. So microaggressions is definitely one. And these are really everyday insults, snubs, slights that are communicated really subtly to somebody, but in a way that's meant to devalue and diminish who a person is. So microaggressions, they're often unintentional and they come across very, very innocently. So questions like, where are you from? You know, where are you really from? Or what's your name? You know, Mohammed, can I call you M? Or your name's too difficult, can I call you something else? Or, you know, saying to certain racial groups, you know, you're being too loud, or you're very articulate. So these are different ways in which microaggressions are expressed. Stereotypes are here. Again, the question, where are you really from? Assumptions made about families, and that's a really important one. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Low expectations. Amy Cooper is another one. Amy Cooper is the woman in Central Park who called the police on a bird watcher. His name is Christian Cooper, and that is another thing that led to a lot of awareness about anti-Black racism. People not pronouncing my name properly, even after I corrected them numerous times. I can very much relate to that. I have a pretty phonetic name, but for some reason it's always butchered. And another response in the chat box, we really need cultural inclusion and neuro inclusion for all learners to thrive. Absolutely. If I had more time today, I would really like to get into how we can foster equity and inclusive education for all families and students, because we have to think beyond just the classroom, but using, you know, that African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. I really believe and value that within our schools. It's not just educators in the classroom, but communities and families that can play such an important role in the education of every single child. New ideas or approaches seen as a threat, not opportunity. In school councils, you know, we've always been doing something the same way. We don't want to change it. And we have to really think critically about what that means when we're trying to bring in different perspectives and different parent groups within our school communities. In schools with few white people and most white teachers, a resistance to change school culture, that can be problematic. And again, that lack of representation can lead to certain voices not being heard. And so we have to think critically about how we can do this. Stereotypical suspicions, go back to where you come from, you don't belong here. Silence, seemingly not harmful, racial slurs. These are all really great examples, also very painful. And so thinking about the impact, when you read these statements, the impact that it has on families who share these lived experiences on a daily basis. And it just amplifies the barriers that exist for many families in accessing opportunities to their children's education. So a couple of them that I wanted to also share are really these forms of racism that exist. And I'll talk about a couple of them. One I think that really sticks out for me is tone policing. You know, I'm often invited to speak on panels like this on anti-racism, but I'm often asked, you know, make it polite and light and positive. Your message must be positive. And I appreciate that. But it's also really important to understand, again, one's social identity, but their social identity in relation to other people's. I'm the mother of Black children. When I talk about anti-Black racism or any form of racism, I bring my lived experiences, which are not positive. And it's important that we don't tone police people we invite to these spaces, or in any situation, if it's a parent in a student in a council meeting, articulating concerns around their kids, you know, that the message has to be delivered in a way that's palatable for those groups maybe who may not necessarily face those experiences with systemic racism. So other ones is silence. Often when we are in these situations and we experience or we encounter racism and we remain silent, again, our refusal or a fear of speaking up can really cause harm. And that's our complicity in enabling racism to exist within our society. So thank you very much for sharing. These are excellent examples. And I really wanted to also touch on anti-Black racism because we see over and over again how Black students in our school systems across North America are really struggling and being left behind. And it's not because they are underachievers, but more so of this, again, the structural and systemic institutional barriers that have historically existed to limit their opportunities within society and within our school system. So the African Canadian Legal Clinic provides this real excellent definition of anti-Black racism, which is the prejudice, attitudes, beliefs, stereotyping, and discrimination that is directed at people of African descent. But it's something that's really critical is that it's deeply rooted in our unique history and experience of enslavement. It is deeply entrenched in our institutions and our policies and practices in a way that anti-Black racism is either functionally normalized or rendered invisible to the larger white society. Again, this goes to that whole color evasion. We are not socialized to think or to talk about race and racism, and therefore we don't see it manifesting within our society. Anti-Black racism is also manifests in the legacy of our existing social, economic, and political marginalization, such that lack of opportunities, lower socioeconomic status, higher unemployment, and significant poverty rates, as well as overrepresentation in the criminal justice system is present. In October of 2016, at the invitation of our Canadian government, the UN Working Group of experts on people of African descent, they came to Canada on a visit and traveled across the country, and then they issued a report which made a number of findings. And one of them was that they expressed deep concern about the human rights situations of African Canadians here in Canada, who faced significant discrimination in the enjoyment of their rights, including in education, which has a serious consequences for their overall well-being. Anti-Black racism has had a profound impact on Black students, including the practice of streaming, which I talked about earlier, disproportionate discipline, including the adultification of young Black students, especially girls. And we see this play out a lot. A few years ago, a young 6-year-old girl, Black girl in a school in Toronto region, had a meltdown at school, and the principal called the police, and they came, and 2 heavy adult police held her down. They shackled her at her legs, at her feet, and her hands, and held her on the ground. And her mother eventually brought a human rights complaint, and the decision was issued this year, finding that her racial identity was a factor in the way in which she was treated. And we see this play out in school boards across North America. And what this does is it leads to a lack of trust amongst Black parents within the towards the education system. It translates into feelings of frustration, especially when their concerns are not being heard. And so, again, thinking about how we can address these disparities for Black families, how we can give a voice to these issues within our communities. And it's really important that we do look at parent engagement from an anti-racist lens. There's so many different ways in which we need to address systemic barriers that have limited parent engagement and involvement within their kids' school communities. I've talked about a few of them today, but there's so many ways in which we can use anti-racism to foster an inclusive and more equitable community for all racialized and Indigenous families within our school communities. Anti-racism is really an active and ongoing process of challenging systems of racism and racial inequality within our society. And to be anti-racist really requires us to be intentional and purposeful and proactive in dismantling systems of oppression. We need to actively identify and prevent inequitable outcomes and power imbalances that affect racialized and Indigenous communities. And this really requires a transformative and again, intentional approach to anti-racism. So I always use the analogy of an escalator. Imagine people moving down an escalator. The anti-racist is the person who's moving up that escalator, going against the machinery and the structures in place in order to achieve something. Anti-racism work also demands that it be done at the internal, interpersonal, institutional, cultural levels in order to effectively address systemic racism. So we need to develop a consciousness of racism. Again, we've been socialized not to think about race and racism. And so we need to be able to see and be in a world that understands the existence of racial inequities. And I think the work first needs to begin with us and those with privilege in order to start moving the needle forward. Acknowledging that racism exists within our society is also very critical, that it is deeply embedded within our institutions and within our school communities is also very critical. And thinking about, how we interact with others, it's not just in front of our students and parents, but also with our children. How are we teaching our kids to be and live in an anti-racist world? How are we socializing them? Do we interact with people of different racialized backgrounds and identities? And it's also important to keep in mind that anti-racism is an approach. It's not an endpoint. The journey, I always say, towards racial equity is a long one, and it's more of us being on a journey and not trying to seek to come to a destination. So this really requires a system-wide approach. We're here, talking today about parent engagement, but it's not just at parent council meetings, but it's also throughout the entire school board. How are we engaging families in the development of the curriculum and engaging them in participating in their children's learning? We have to be, again, intentional and proactive and committed to doing that, whether we're directors of education, trustees, ECEs, teachers, superintendents. It really requires everyone to be actively engaged. Of course, all parents. And so I want to talk about this, how can we improve parent engagement so that everyone, when they send their kids to school, when they participate in their school children's education, that everyone feels like their voices are valued, that they're being heard, and that they're being included. And this is very critical to ensuring effective parent engagement. And I think first and foremost, it's important for us to address the individual and systemic barriers that many parents face within our school communities. Don't be dismissive. There have been so many times when I, as a Black parent, have approached my school administrators and educators about these challenges. And the response often is, well, we have a zero tolerance approach to racism, but then there are no actual steps taken to address the racism that my kids have faced. And so what I decided to do was attend parent council meetings and I really, being on at those meetings, I never felt myself represented or seen. I was the only racialized parent there, and the issues that were being discussed had nothing to do with my kids' well-being. They didn't explore issues around race or racism, and so, even when I tried to address these issues, and there were meaningful ways in which to listen, but there were no proactive steps done afterwards. And we see this happening across the board with many racialized parents who are trying to really bring in issues that are affecting their kids. The Globe and Mail reported earlier this month or a few months ago about a Black mother in Toronto again who tried to add to her school parents council a discussion about how to support Black families and students within the board, and it was supposed to be added to the June agenda meeting, and towards the end of the meeting, her matter was not addressed, and so they adjourned the meeting and said they would add it to the next agenda in September. And delaying that discussion is very dismissive to parents. And so how do we think about, including those voices in a way that will honor the parents' needs and the needs of these families and students? We know again that COVID has had a disproportionate impact on Black and other racialized communities with loss of jobs, food insecurities. Many racialized families are essential workers with income disparities. And so how do we address those systemic barriers? For instance, we saw within my work at least, a lot of families, newcomers to Canada, didn't have access to internet sticks or technology. And so, there was a real push to ensure that kids got internet sticks or tablets, Chromebooks, in order for them to do their work. And this not only gives the kids access to technology, but it also enables the parents to remain engaged. So now parents, as we shift to virtual meetings, can also have an opportunity to participate in these meetings. Language barriers are also really an impediment to ensuring parent engagement. So, how are we communicating with our families? Do we just traditionally send out messages and communications in English or French? Or do we look at the demographics within our school communities and say, okay, so, these types of languages, Arabic or Urdu or Spanish are being spoken. So let's communicate to our families in these languages in a way that, again, fosters inclusive participation. And again, just going back to student councils, how are we amplifying, when we look at our agenda at every meeting, whose voices are we amplifying and whose voices are we are absent from these issues that we will be discussing in these meetings. And another one is to ensure that engagement is culturally responsive. Understanding the diverse cultural identities of our families within our school communities is really integral. The idea that in many cultures, again, like I said earlier, parents are deferential and so may not get involved, but this is not necessarily, should be interpreted as a form of disengagement. Parents I always distinguish between internal and external engagement. So the internal engagement are the families at home who are really encouraging their kids' education. They're working with their kids to read, to learn about their language, their cultural identity. They're pushing education and academic excellence at home. They may not necessarily be showing up to student council meetings. They may not necessarily be baking for preparing food for bake sales. But that doesn't mean that they're not interested or engaged in their kids' education. And so finding ways to engage with these parents in a way that responds to their diverse cultural identities is really critical. Engaging families, I think, is so critical within student council, is to engage the whole family. We think that student councils are for parents only, but bringing in the kids, having the whole family participate, especially now if there are opportunities to be virtual and there's technology for everyone, then engaging and bringing in those families would be very critical. Thinking about when we're having our parent council meetings, student council meetings, are they often just taking place in the evenings? Or can we switch them around so that they're also on weekends in ways that respect a religious observance? and also other practices that may take place. But just again, thinking about how we can have these meetings in a way that is going to foster more inclusivity. And then increasing the representation amongst issues affecting parents and parent engagement, engaging families throughout the school board, consulting with parents in developing and implementing board improvement plans, school improvement plans, even in the curriculum. In my school board, we switched our curriculum for English literature this year. The board decided to stop teaching To Kill a Mockingbird in high schools and brought in Own Voices text. And this is books written by people who have the same lived experiences of those they're writing about. And one great way to ensure that is to have parents participate in the selection of those books and the reading of those books. It was so nice to see how positively students responded to these ideas, and having their parents participate also increases their involvement in their children's education. Valuing parent voice, I think, is really important. Not all parents speak English or may be highly educated or may have the qualifications to be a treasurer or lead parent council or school council events. But all parents have a voice and have an important role to play. And I often think of a Somali mother who, despite having 3 jobs full-time, showed up every morning to be a crossing guard at her child's school. And that connection that she had to her child's learning was so invaluable. Kids throughout the school community were able to interact and relate to her, and her role was as important as the parent leading the student council meeting. So there's so many ways in which we can engage our parents, keeping in mind a number of the issues that I addressed today. So I know we're almost out of time. I just wanted to, if there are any questions that you may have for me, I'm happy to take them.